The Jets are trying to bounce back after a rough 2023. How can they do it? History can be our guide, as we'll discuss today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Thursday, July 11th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, the Jets in 2024 are going to try and bounce back after a difficult season. And on today's show, we're going to look at the last three Jets teams that have posted winning records after disappointing seasons and try and find some parallels between the Jets of those seasons and the Jets of 2024. And we have to go back kind of far because Jets have had 8 straight losing seasons. As you well know, if you're a Jets fan, Jets have not made the playoffs in 13 years, but they haven't even had a winning record since 2015. However, that 2015 team did bounce back after a rough 2014 season. In 2014, the Jets went 4-12, and that precipitated a number of changes. John Idzik, the general manager, was fired after 2014. Rex Ryan, the head coach, was fired after 2014. So Mike Maccagnan and Todd Bowles came in. And Maccagnan, of course, is remembered very poorly for his tenure with the Jets because, if we're going to be honest, he did a very poor job. But what's forgotten is that Maccagnan's tenure started off fantastically. I mean, I think, and I include myself in this number, Maccagnan probably had like a 98% approval rating after that first season in 2015. I mean, look, I love Mike Maccagnan. You probably love Mike Maccagnan after that first season. Jets had a big year. And I don't think the expectations were as high in 2015 as they will be heading into 2024, but I do think there are some parallels we can draw. Now, in 2014, Jets offense was miserable. Geno Smith had a rough second season. He was benched. Michael Vick was the backup quarterback. He stepped into the lineup a couple of times, and this was, Michael Vick near the end of his career. But the Jets also they just really did not have many good pieces on the offensive side of the ball. So what did the Jets do that offseason? They went out and made a big trade. They went out and got Brandon Marshall, who made an instant impact on offense. And the Jets also made a number of other big moves. The Jets were very active in free agency that year, and they made big moves on both sides of the ball. As I mentioned, they traded for Brandon Marshall. They also traded for Ryan Fitzpatrick. And then on the other side of the ball, they overhauled their corner group. Darrelle Revis, Antonio Cromartie, Buster Skrine came in. Marcus Gilchrist came in to play the safety position. Lots of moves to bring in veterans. And the Jets took a roster that wasn't very talented and turned it into one of the better rosters in the league, at least for that 1 year. When you add a lot of veterans, it may not have a lot of staying power. Your team may not be good for a very long time, but you can really improve your team quite a bit, at least in the short run. And the Jets did that, and they went from 4 wins to 10 wins. It was a talented team. And in particular, the offense got a lot better. And that offense in 2015, I mean, it had a decent offensive line, but I think it was really about the skill players, particularly Marshall. Eric Decker was still around. The Jets had signed Decker a year earlier. Chris Ivory, who the Jets had traded for a couple of years prior to that, was around, and the Jets went from having a really lousy offense in 2014 to having a pretty good offense. And I think when you look at what you're looking for from the Jets in 2024, you're looking for them to turn around an offense that was completely inept a year ago, an offense that just could not function. And we know that the biggest reason for that was they didn't have their quarterback for all but 4 plays last year. But I don't think you go from your offense having high expectations to not being able to function at all, and it's only because of the quarterback. The Jets had other pieces that did not work, and the Jets made a lot of moves this offseason to try and upgrade their offense. And in 2015, the offense wasn't fantastic. It was a good offense. It wasn't a great offense. I think the Jets have their hopes higher in 2024. I think the team overall is hoping to go to the Super Bowl this year in a way that those probably weren't the expectations in 2015. But it does show that you can turn things around quickly. That Jets team in 2015, they benefited from a soft schedule, if we're going to be honest. That's part of the reason they got to 10 wins. But if you look at their point differential that year, they may have had a soft schedule, but it's not like they skated by. They dominated bad teams that year. And they had one of the better point differentials in the NFL. And I think another thing to point out is, and I hesitate to make this. I hesitate to say this because I'm not making a comparison between the two. But how many times through the years, especially the last 15 years or so, have the Jets thrown some rookie quarterback out there who really doesn't know what he's doing, and they've kind of thrown him to the wolves? When the Jets have had good offenses of late, it's typically been with a veteran quarterback under center. And I'm not going to say Ryan. It'd be ridiculous to compare Ryan Fitzpatrick to Aaron Rodgers. We're not going there. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that the Jets had a veteran quarterback that year. It's one of the rare times they did. And veteran quarterbacks have a better ability to make an offense work because rookies are just trying to tread water. And second-year guys and third-year guys, they're really just trying to tread water. They're trying to learn the nuances of NFL defenses. They're really just trying to survive. I mean, if you've ever heard quarterbacks talk about this, and if you ever listened to a game on CBS called by Tony Romo, he's talking about this, how your first couple of years, you don't know what's going on. You don't know what a defense is doing. You're struggling to read defenses. You're just trying to survive. After you get some experience under your belts, you kind of figure out how to manipulate them. And Ryan Fitzpatrick, I guess, did that a little bit. Jets have the ultimate guy who can do that this year in Aaron Rodgers, a guy who really, really knows how to run an offense, a guy who really, really knows how to manipulate a defense. And when we talk about things that can lift an offense up, there's obviously nothing more than the quarterback. It's the most important position on the field. You may not need me for that analysis, but I think if you look at the lesson of 2015 and the things it can bring the 2024 Jets, the lessons we can learn as far as being optimistic that the team can improve, it's that you can turn it around quickly. And look, this 2024 Jets team is going to be led by a lot of veterans. You have some guys who are still on the younger side, a lot of your key players like Sauce and Garrett and Brees, that fantastic, and Jermaine, that fantastic 2022 draft class. Michael Carter II a year ago. There's not all the guys are old, but Jets are certainly leaning on a lot of more veteran players. And while it did not work for the long run for the Jets in past 2016 and into 2017, it did work for the Jets in 2015. And yeah, the team fell short of the playoffs, but the team did win 6 more games year to year. And the other aspect of this is that I think if you lined up the 2015 Jets versus the 2024 Jets, 24 Jets are better. So to the extent there's an impact, I think you can hope it's an even greater impact this year, because Jets roster is just better than it was in 2015. So 2015 team showed us that, if you add some impact players on the offensive side of the ball, impact players on both sides of the ball, because Jets added a lot of impact players on defense that year, and the Jets did add some impact players on defense this year. Talking about trading for Hassan Reddick, who, contract situation aside, we're all hoping is going to have a big impact. You can turn things around very quickly in this league. The NFL is a league where, in this day and age where, you make one move or two moves, and it's, maybe that may not do a whole lot for you. But the NFL is a league where you can make a lot of moves that change the trajectory of your franchise over the course of one off season. And I think the Jets certainly hope that they've done that this off season. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue our discussion of other recent Jets bounce back seasons, and we're going to go to the season that probably has the most parallels to this one, and in part it's because of the position the Jets got, the biggest position where the Jets upgraded, and the player's resume and the team the player played for in the past. You might know where I'm going with this. It's not exactly the same as that year, but there are a lot of similarities with a certain Jets team that this 2024 Jets team has, and we'll discuss them as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. But Major League Baseball is not all Gametime has. They have tickets for any sport you could want to go to. If you want to check out the Jets this autumn when they return to action, once we get to football or hockey season, you want to go to a concert, you want to go see some theater, Gametime is the place to go. I've used Gametime myself. It's amazing. It's super easy to use. I've used it a number of times right before my event started. I just pull out my phone, open up the app, And I still can't believe some of the deals I've gotten on there. It's super easy to use, just a couple taps, and you have an amazing deal. And it's just absolutely out of this world. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. This is actually the end of our summer schedule. Once we get to Monday, we're going to be back to our normal schedule, 5 days a week, every day. Can't wait to talk about the Jets as we get ready for the upcoming 2024 season. But today we're kind of looking to the past. We're trying to draw parallels between past Jets teams that bounced back after a disappointing season, because 2023 was a disappointing season. In the pantheon of disappointing Jets seasons, I think that was up there after the Rodgers trade, after all the excitements, all the buzz, Hard Knocks, and then, of course, we all know what happened with Rodgers. Can the Jets bounce back? And, the answer is clearly they can. This is a talented roster. This is a team that's, on paper, very good. But, we have to see how the pieces come together. Another year where we had to see where the pieces came together was 2008. And this is a year that draws a lot of parallels because of what the Jets had at the quarterback position that year. It was Brett Favre. The Jets had traded for Brett Favre. Now, that was Favre's one and only year with the Jets. This is technically Rodgers' second season with the Jets. There's the other big difference with Favre coming in is the Jets traded for him in August. The Jets traded for him the day before the first preseason game. So he did not have a full training camp to get the system under his belt. He really struggled in the early part of that season, knowing where receivers were going, understanding what the play calls were. It was an issue for the Jets. I mean, there was a Monday night game, week 3 in San Diego that year, where Favre had no idea where the receivers were going. He was throwing interceptions. Receivers were cutting in, and Favre was throwing down the field like they were going to run a vertical route. Rodgers, of course, for all the issues the Jets have with Nathaniel Hackett, and there are many, and Hackett should not be here, Rodgers is very comfortable with the system the Jets are running. But that 2008 season was about more than Favre. In 2007, again, the Jets had a disappointing year. They went 4-12, and they were coming off a playoff appearance in 2006. It was a surprising playoff appearance. So expectations were high heading into 2007, and things just did not work out. The Jets essentially brought the same team back. They didn't really make a ton of big moves in the offseason. They drafted Revis. They signed David Harris. They traded for Thomas Jones. But it was a relatively quiet offseason given the Jets' resources. They went 4-12. What happens in 2008? Jets bring all these guys in. They overhaul their offensive line. They sign Damian Woody and Alan Faneca. They, of course, bring in Favre. On the defensive side of the ball, they signed Calvin Pace. Jets made quite a big splash that year in free agency. They also brought in Tony Richardson to play fullback, who was a big leader. And you can see the parallels. So first of all, there's the Rodgers-Favre parallel. I mean, that's pretty obvious. The Jets kind of felt like they had gone as far as they could with Chad Pennington at quarterback at that point. Pennington had suffered a number of career-altering injuries at that point. But also, Favre wasn't the only guy the Jets brought in. And the real place I focus maybe more than Favre is on the offensive line, because they signed 2 veterans. And we talk about this all the time. It's not easy to overhaul an offensive line in the course of one offseason. Now, at least in 2000, at least that year in 2008, the Jets actually started with a pretty good base, because they had 3 good offensive linemen. They had DeBrickashaw Ferguson playing left tackle. They had Nick Mangold playing center, and they had Brandon Moore playing right guard. But the right tackle and left guard spots were enormous issues. Adrian Clark played left guard, and I have to tell you, this is not hyperbole. Adrian Clark's the worst guard I've ever seen play. He was their guard in 2007, starting on the left side. So the Jets went out and signed Alan Faneca. At right tackle, they needed an upgrade from Anthony Clement. So they go out and get Damian Woody. And that line gelled. That line meshed immediately. A couple of veteran additions fixed the offensive line. It doesn't always happen. It's tough. We always talk about the importance of chemistry on the offensive line. We talk about the importance of continuity. But sometimes adding a veteran or two ails a lot of your problems on the offensive line. If you look at what the Jets did this offseason, they brought in, Tyron Smith is like to left tackles what Alan Faneca was to left guards in that day and age. Alan Faneca is a Hall of Fame left guard. Tyron Smith is going to be a future Hall of Fame left tackle. And he's the type of guy who I do think just could have a multiplier effect, because he just makes everyone better. If you're around Tyron Smith, you're going to play better. And on the right side, in 2008, the Jets brought in Damian Woody to play right tackle. This year, they brought in Morgan Moses. Just two really solid players. Woody had an interesting career trajectory because the rare guy who started at center, then moved to guard, then moved to tackle. It's more often you see guys move inside. You see guys kick from tackle to guard. Woody actually moved outside the longer his career progressed. But if you look at the situation, that built a stable offensive line for the Jets. And it wasn't just for 1 year. That offensive line was the basis of a lot of Jets success that followed in 2009 and 2010 under Rex Ryan. There was a 3-year window where the Jets just built this outstanding offensive line. It was done through veteran additions. Now in 2008, the Jets season ended on a disappointing note. They finished 9-7, which again was a 5-win improvement. So that was a pretty big improvement year over year. And it shows you can turn things around quickly in this league. Now everybody remembers Favre got injured. I actually would argue that the 2009 Jets were kind of misremembered because everybody has this idea the Jets were heading to the Super Bowl that year if Favre doesn't get injured and isn't playing hurt the last 5 weeks. I think the truth is a little bit more nuanced than that. I think that team was not really as good as people remember. They had some fantastic individual moments. They crushed an Arizona team that ended up going to the Super Bowl. They beat the Titans at a point where Tennessee was 10-0 or 11-0. People do forget that team had some very shaky moments. They had a very fortunate schedule in October when they won a couple games that they probably against really, really bad teams that if they had played, a decent team, Cincinnati or Kansas City, those were two really bad teams in 2008. Tough to remember now because Cincinnati and Kansas City are at the top of the league, but 2008 Jets kind of skated by a couple of wins with some very shaky performances against better opponents they may have lost. Favre had some very shaky moments that year. So I'm not sure that team was necessarily heading to the Super Bowl, but the one lesson you can learn, and I think the one parallel you can take, it's actually not about Favre, because I think in many ways there are more differences than similarities. Once we get past the superficial, comparing Favre's Jets tenure with Rodgers' Jets tenure, Favre didn't really want to be here. Rodgers wants to be here. Favre came in late. The Rodgers trade dragged out too long, but it did not impact his preparation for the season. Favre did not know the system. Rodgers does. I think when I'm talking the parallels, and one of the biggest reasons the Jets improved 5 wins from 2007 to 2008 is the offensive line. They fixed the offensive line. They added a couple of veterans. They had some good young pieces, as the Jets do now. Elijah Vera Tucker and Joe Tippmann, and you hope that you hope that AVT and Joe Tippmann are as good of a young base for the offensive line as DeBrickashaw and Mangold were. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself by making that comparison, but you had some decent young players. What you needed were some veteran guys to solidify it. Jets got them in 2008. They hope they got them once again in 2024. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're just going to move back a couple more years to close out the show because there's a season where the Jets bounced back. It was 18 years ago, and it taught you a pretty simple lesson: how important the most important position on the field is. And we'll go into more detail on that continuing here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. The Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday. We're talking about Jets bounce back seasons. Now, unfortunately, the Jets have lost a lot in recent years, so we don't have a ton of terribly recent experiences of the Jets bouncing back from difficult seasons. Typically, they don't bounce back, but expectations are high this year. This is a very talented Jets roster. We just talked about the 2008 Jets, but if you go back 2 years earlier, 2006, that was a team that bounced back from just an incredibly disappointing 2005. The Jets in 2005 had Super Bowl ambitions. They had taken the top-seeded Steelers the year before. They had taken the top-seeded Steelers to overtime in the playoffs. They went out and made a couple of key additions that offseason, namely bringing in Hall of Fame corner Ty Law. And I think a lot of people thought the Jets had a shot to make a run in 2005. Well, unfortunately, that team was just incredibly snake bitten by injuries. They lost their top 2 quarterbacks by the end of week 3. By the end of that season, by the final game of the season, 11 of their 22 opening day starters ended up on IR. So they entered 2006, and expectations were not high. The Jets were kind of in a reset year. They had jettisoned a lot of guys to try and clear their cap situation. But in 2006, Eric Mangini's first year, Jets surprised everybody. They won 10 games and ended up going to the playoffs. Now, the parallels between the 2006 team and the 2024 team are not that great because that was expected to be the worst team in the NFL. People were talking about the Jets as a contender for the top pick in the NFL draft heading into the start of the 2006 season. This year, the Jets are among the teams getting a lot of buzz for potentially making a run to the Super Bowl. But I think there is one thing that sticks out. It's the quarterback. How big of a difference just having a quarterback can make. And look, Aaron Rodgers is obviously better than post-injury Chad Pennington. Pennington was coming off essentially 2 serious shoulder injuries and was limited, but he could play effectively. And when the Jets caught some breaks, when they got a relatively favorable schedule, they took advantage of that because, again, Pennington knew what he was doing under center. And, look, if Pennington knew what he was doing after 2 shoulder injuries, Rodgers is going to know even better what he's doing when, his injury is not going to impact his throwing motion, when his injury is not going to impact his arm strength. So, you look at what happened with the Jets on offense last year, and listen, I'll be the first to tell you, I've said this over and over, it was about more than Rodgers. It wasn't just about losing the quarterback. There were other things under the surface that the Jets were dealing with. But in 2005, losing Pennington was not the only issue the Jets had, but it was the biggest issue. I think everybody would agree with that. Just as last year, look, Jets had a lot of problems on the offensive line. They did not have enough talent at the skill positions. And fortunately, on paper at least, you hope the Jets have addressed these things, bringing in Mike Williams, bringing in the guys we just mentioned, Morgan Moses and Tyron Smith. But everybody knows there's going to be a pretty big boost when you put Aaron Rodgers in instead of having Zach Wilson start most of your games. That was the whole theory behind last year. We're saying this time last year, having Aaron Rodgers as a quarterback instead of Zach Wilson, that's going to lead to you winning more games. That's going to improve your offense quite a bit. And I think there are moments where maybe we can overstate how important the quarterback is. It is important to say that that's relative, that a quarterback obviously makes a big difference. And having Rodgers under center, and it goes beyond the obvious. Like, Rodgers' stats are going to be better than what Zach Wilson did last year, and the other guys, Tim Boyle and Trevor Siemian. We all know that, but it's also how you get there. Rodgers at the line pre-snap is going to get you into better situations. Again, going back to what I said earlier, understanding of a veteran quarterback how to run an offense is at a much higher level than it is a young guy just trying to tread water, just trying to survive. Rodgers is going to get the Jets in the right play more often. There might be a big run Breece Hall rips off that, you don't appreciate Rodgers' role in it, but Rodgers saw that something in the defense that, he causes him to audible at the line to change the play. And he sees that if I give the ball to Breece here in this spot, he's going to break off a big run. There are going to be little subtle things that nobody will ever notice. I mean, little plays that keep the Jets offense on schedule, a little smoke route. That's when, you may have a run play called and the corner's giving like 10 yards of cushion to the wide receiver on the outside. So Rodgers just says, hey, I'm just going to throw the ball out to the receiver on the outside on 1st and 10. Receiver will pick up 6-7 yards and your offense is on schedule. Just little things like that. Those are the types of things that, may not really stand out as much as the spectacular plays. And of course, the spectacular plays are important, but great quarterbacking, much more of great quarterbacking is mundane than people realize. It's about keeping the offense on schedule. It's about finding the open receiver. It's about checking the ball down when nobody's open down the field. And these are things Rodgers is going to bring to the table. And I think it's something people won't appreciate, but it will make a big difference. And it's the type of thing that can lead to a big improvement. And look, we know the Jets need a big improvement because their offense last year was awful. And we know Rodgers is not the only piece. I've argued extensively that Jets can't sit around and act like Rodgers returning is going to fix everything. And fortunately, this offseason, they did not. They brought in Mike Williams. They brought in the offensive lineman to pair with Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. I think Breece Hall is going to be a big benefit to Rodgers because Rodgers won't have to do quite as much. Rodgers will be able to lean on his run game a little bit more with such a dynamic running back in the backfield. But I think anybody would realize that having Aaron Rodgers back in the lineup, that's going to do big things for the Jets. That's going to help this team enormously. And that was, I'm sure there are many teams you can point to this lesson with, teams that lost their quarterback the year before and bounced back the next season. Jets are hoping they'll be one of those teams. They were that team in 2006. And look, that was a team that accomplished a lot by winning 10 games and making the playoffs. And they lost in the first round to New England. But the playoffs were a wild dream entering 2006. This is a team with much higher expectations because of the talent level. And for getting your quarterback back in the lineup, obviously a pretty big deal. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and listening on the podcast first, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Thursday, everybody. We'll be back next time to talk more Jets.